I don't think Kody understands how much damage he's done, and I don't think he realizes how obvious it is that Robyn shapes almost every decision he makes about his older kids. The thing is, Mykelti and Tony aren't afraid to say the quiet part out loud anymore, and what they're saying makes it pretty clear that the family's collapse didn't just happen. It was pushed along. Hey friends, welcome back. Today we're digging into the moment Mykelti and Tony finally stopped tiptoeing around the truth and called out Robyn for turning Kody against his kids. This isn't just another recap, it's a breakdown of the patterns, the manipulation, the emotional fallout, and the very real reasons the Brown kids no longer trust their dad. Before we get into their comments, you need the setup. Because on the surface it looks like Kody is doing this big reconciliation tour. He's crying on camera, he's giving speeches about heartbreak, he's trying to look like the wounded father who just wants to rebuild bridges, but that act only works if you haven't been watching the last decade of this family's life. And Mykelti sees that, Tony sees that, most of the kids see that. They grew up in the chaos. They lived through the favoritism. They watched Kody rewrite history while Robyn sat next to him, making everything conditional. A relationship with dad has become a package deal. You want him, you better accept her. And for a lot of these kids, that's not going to happen. Now, before we go deeper, here's the moment that set everything off. Mykelti and Tony were doing one of their casual reaction videos while watching the season. Nothing dramatic. Nothing staged. But when the episode hit the scenes where Kody and Robyn talk about reconnecting with the kids, everything shifted. Mykelti's face changed. Tony stopped joking. You could feel the tension building. Because according to them, the story Kody's telling on the show is not the story they lived. And here's where it gets interesting. What they said wasn't explosive in volume, it was explosive in honesty. They said that the version of Kody we see around Robyn is not the version of Kody they grew up with. They said Robyn influences the way he thinks, the way he reacts, even the way he interprets what his kids are telling him. They pointed out he acts like a completely different person when she's not there. To them, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And today, we're breaking down exactly how that pattern formed, why it stayed hidden for so long, and why Mykelti and Tony are refusing to stay quiet anymore. What Mykelti and Tony make clear right away is that there isn't just one version of Kody. There's the dad they remember growing up, and then there is the version that seems permanently fused to Robyn. And the gap between those two versions has become the center of the family's collapse. Here's where their frustration really comes through. They're not saying their dad was perfect. They're not pretending the older kids had this ideal childhood. But they are saying that Kody wasn't always this angry, defensive, and withdrawn. He wasn't always shutting them out. He wasn't always rewriting every disagreement as some kind of betrayal. They say that shift happened when the family started revolving around one relationship, Kody and Robyn. That's the central conflict. It's not just about hurt feelings, it's about influence. From their point of view, Kody stopped acting like a father with his own independent thoughts and started echoing whatever Robyn wanted or feared. If Robyn felt slighted, Kody treated it like a personal attack. If she wanted distance, Kody cut ties. If she was uncomfortable, he created new rules. And every time he did it, he framed it as leadership when really it was compliance. To the kids, Kody became unpredictable because he wasn't reacting to them. He was reacting to her reactions. And once that dynamic settled in, the rest of the family felt like they were competing against a relationship they could never win against. Let me set up a key moment that Mykelti brought up. It's small, easy to miss, but it says everything on special forces. Kody didn't have Robyn with him. No emotional buffer. No one whispering in his ear. No one to perform for. And according to Mykelti, that's the version of her dad that felt real. That's the version she recognized. He took blame for the broken relationships. He admitted faults. He didn't look like the man who was constantly defending himself on sister wives. To Mykelti, the absence of Robyn stripped away the persona. He wasn't acting like the defensive husband trying to protect one marriage at the cost of every other relationship. He was just a guy trying to be honest. And that's the part that hurts her the most. Because if he can be himself when Robyn isn't around, it proves he has the ability to show up. It proves he knows the relationships matter. It proves the kids aren't imagining the influence. But the minute he went home, boom, accountability. Gone. Honesty gone. the self-reflection disappeared. Because, according to Mykelti and Tony, once Kody was back with Robyn, he was back in the environment where she controls the framing of everything. And he let her do it. That's where this conflict becomes bigger than one disagreement. It's about identity. It's about loyalty. It's about whether Kody still makes decisions as a father or only as a husband who can't risk upsetting the one wife he has left. This is just the beginning of what Mykelti and Tony unpack, and the deeper they go, the more the pattern shows itself. There's a specific point in the episode where you can almost see Mykelti decide she's done sugarcoating things. She's watching her dad talk on the show, and she pauses, tilts her head, and basically says, "This isn't him. This is him performing." That's the moment the whole dynamic snaps into focus, because what she sees isn't her dad's natural personality. It's a filtered version of him, shaped by whatever he thinks will protect Robyn from criticism, and that's when she lays out one of the strongest points she's ever made. The dad she recognizes is the one who shows up when Robyn isn't influencing him. Here's how she explains it. She says that on Special Forces, he acted more like the father she remembers. He was calmer, less dramatic, less defensive. He wasn't wrapped up in theatrics or mind games, and he wasn't fixated on protecting someone else's narrative. He was just himself. That detail matters because it exposes how much of Kody's behavior on Sister Wives is reactive. And according to Mykelti, the reaction isn't to the kids, it's to Robyn. When she's around, he becomes rigid, closed off, and quick to blame. When she's not, he's more grounded, more accountable, more emotionally present. To the kids, that difference is not subtle, it's glaring. And this is where Tony steps in with one of the most honest takes in the whole conversation. He says that when Kody is home, he's always in this mode of protecting Robyn. Even when she isn't being attacked, even when she hasn't said anything, he anticipates what she might feel. And he reacts to that prediction as if it's fact. Tony basically says he's playing a villain on purpose to defend her. That's not just commentary, that's a son-in-law calling out the pattern everybody else tiptoes around. And what's wild is that he says it so casually. There's no drama in his voice. He's not trying to stir anything up. He's just describing what he sees. And in that simplicity, you can tell he's watched this happen for years. The more you listen to Mykelti and Tony, the clearer it becomes that this isn't about disliking Robyn as a person. It's about watching a dad lose himself in a relationship to the point where he stops thinking independently. When someone you love starts mirroring another person's fear, resentment, and anxiety, it doesn't just change them, it erases the version of them you used to know. That's what Mykelti is grieving. Not just the loss of access to her dad, the loss of who he used to be, and it's why she's no longer willing to pretend everything is just complicated. To her, it's not complicated. It's obvious. Her dad is influenced by a partner who has learned exactly how to shape his reactions. One of the biggest red flags, Mykelti points out, is how her dad handled responsibility when he wasn't around Robyn. On Special Forces, Kody talked openly about the distance with his kids. He didn't blame anyone else. He didn't spin it. He didn't bring up old grudges. He admitted he made mistakes. He said the fallout was on him. And then he came home. The second he walked through that door, the entire tone shifted. The accountability evaporated. The version of him who took responsibility was replaced with a guy who suddenly claimed the kids mistreated him, misunderstood him, or owed him something. He went from, "I failed," to, "They failed me." That flip isn't accidental. It follows a pattern Mykelti and Tony have seen for years. There's a moment on the show where Robyn tells him he doesn't need to apologize so much. She tells him he's being too hard on himself. She basically soothes him into letting go of the guilt he briefly embraced. And then she adds a detail that sets everything back on fire. She tells him that reconnecting with the kids only makes sense if he believes those relationships have value. That comment sounds harmless until you think about what it implies. If a parent needs to evaluate whether their relationship with their own children has value, something's wrong. Parents don't assess their children like an investment, they just show up. They apologize, they try. They don't weigh the pros and cons. But here's the problem. Kody listens to Robyn as if her approval is a moral compass. When she downplays the importance of fixing things, he follows her lead. When she makes the relationship conditional, he makes it conditional too. And because the kids don't trust her, and she knows that tying reconciliation to acceptance of her becomes a guaranteed dead end, This is where Tony adds another layer. He says that when Robyn talks like this, Kody absorbs it as absolute truth. If she says reunification requires the kids to embrace her too, Kody treats it as a package deal. And if the kids push back on Robyn, he assumes they're pushing back on him. It traps everyone. The kids can't win. Kody won't compromise. And Robyn knows exactly what she's doing. What makes this dynamic so heavy is that it turns the parent-child relationship into a negotiation instead of a connection. Kody isn't approaching his kids as a father who loves them. He's approaching them as someone trying to protect a fragile marriage by demanding loyalty tests. And that's why his apology tour feels hollow to the kids. They don't want a rehearsed speech. They want consistent action. They want him to show up without a list of conditions. They want a dad who thinks for himself. But every time he gets close to making progress, he goes home, talks to Robyn, and reverts to the version of himself that pushes everyone away again. There's a quiet frustration that builds in the family long before Mykelti and Tony ever talk about it publicly. It starts small, a promise here, a check, in there, a half-hearted, "I'm trying." And for a while the kids give Kody the benefit of the doubt. They want things to get better. They're willing to meet him halfway. Some of them would even meet him more than halfway, just to feel close to their dad again. But every single time they inch toward healing, the same pattern unfolds. Kody goes home, talks to Robyn, and suddenly the progress disappears. The apologies get rewritten, the responsibility dissolves, the tone changes, the empathy fades. He becomes defensive again, like he's been told the kids are overreacting. You can only watch that happen so many times before you stop trusting the process. In the episode, Mykelti says her siblings aren't angry because they hate their dad. They're angry because they don't believe him anymore. They've heard the speeches. They've seen the tears. They've sat through conversations that felt promising. But the follow-through never comes. She describes it like being handed a gift box that's always empty inside. That description is important because it highlights something people often miss about this family drama. The kids aren't asking for perfection. They're asking for consistency. They don't need grand gestures. They need him to show up the same way 5 days in a row. They need the version of their dad who takes responsibility, not the version who retreats into defensiveness the minute Robyn feels stressed. And that's where the trust breaks. Not from one argument, not from one bad season, but from a cycle they've watched repeat for years. Tony puts it even more bluntly. He says the kids feel like their dad apologizes for show, not for change. They think he apologizes when cameras are around or when he's seeking sympathy, but not when he's at home actually making decisions. To them, the real version of him is the one behind closed doors, not the one on television. And that's a harsh thing to accept about a parent. There's a moment every adult child reaches when they stop evaluating their parent by what they say and start evaluating them by what they choose. Mykelti's siblings hit that point years ago. It's not rebellion. It's not bitterness. It's clarity. They want a dad who can stand up on his own 2 feet. A dad who makes choices based on his own heart. A dad who doesn't change personalities depending on who he's trying to protect. From their perspective, Robyn isn't just influencing him, she's steering him. And the version of him she shapes is the version they don't trust. So when people ask, why don't the kids just forgive him? The answer is simple. You can forgive someone, you can love them, but trusting them again. That takes repeated actions that match the apologies. And the kids haven't seen that yet. What they have seen is a dad who talks about reconciliation, but builds barriers at the same time. A dad who says he wants peace only after his children accept someone they don't trust. A dad who talks about unity, but takes Robyn's grievances and makes them the family's problem. This is the emotional foundation behind Mykelti and Tony's blunt call-out. If you look back at the early seasons of the show, it's clear the family had problems long before things split apart. There were misunderstandings, jealousy, tension, and old wounds that never fully healed. But even with all of that, the kids still saw their dad as someone who belonged to everyone. He had flaws, but he was present. He moved between houses. He tried to balance things. He didn't always do it well, but he tried. Then something shifted. The kids can pinpoint it without hesitation. They say the divide didn't begin with COVID. It didn't begin with arguments. 8 began with the moment Robyn became the emotional center of Kody's world, not as a wife, as his interpreter. On the show, there's a moment where Robyn tells Kody she doesn't feel accepted by the older kids, and she says it in a way that makes the tension feel like an attack. She doesn't soften it, she doesn't ask him to understand their perspective. She positions herself as the one who's being wronged, and what does Kody do? He reacts instantly. His posture changes, his voice tightens, and he starts defending her before he even talks to the kids. That's the dynamic. The kids eventually recognized Robyn doesn't confront them directly. She lets Kody feel her stress. He takes that stress, interprets it as mistreatment, and then he goes after the kids. It creates a loop where he's always responding to what he thinks she feels. To the outside world, that might look like loyalty. To the kids, it looks like substitution. Their dad stopped being their dad and became Robyn's shield. Tony lays this out with almost uncomfortable clarity. He says the problem isn't just that Robyn influences Kody, it's that he lets her influence reframe every conflict. If she feels hurt, he assumes the kids caused it. If she feels insecure, he assumes the kids created that insecurity. If she feels judged, he thinks everyone is against her. He becomes the voice of her fears, and once he does, he turns those fears into accusations. That's why the kids see her as the line in the sand. Not because they dislike her, but because she's the filter everything now goes through. Once a parent starts treating one relationship as the axis, the whole family spins around. Everyone else ends up in orbit. And orbit is not the same as connection. Orbit is distance disguised as structure. You're close, but not close enough to be heard. That's what happened here. Conversations turned into confrontations. Disagreements turned into disloyalty. Boundaries turned into betrayal. Because if a child said something that made Robyn uncomfortable, Kody reacted as if they had attacked him personally. It didn't matter what they actually said. It only mattered how she felt. And here's the real emotional cost of that pattern. When a parent absorbs someone else's feelings as their own, the kids lose access to the parent they recognize. They're no longer talking to the dad who raised them. They're talking to the version of him that Robyn's anxiety creates. And that version comes with assumptions, defenses, and accusations the kids never asked for. This is the turning point. Mykelti keeps circling back to. This is the era where the distance started spreading. This is the moment where their dad became someone they could no longer approach without feeling judged. The split in the family didn't happen overnight. It built slowly through small moments, quiet shifts, and unspoken resentments. But COVID didn't just speed things up. It exposed everything that had been simmering underneath. And for the kids, this was the moment the pattern around Robyn stopped being subtle and became impossible to ignore. It started with rules, strict rules, rules that didn't match what the rest of the Brown households were doing, rules that, according to the kids, came straight from Robyn's house. Kody said the rules were about safety, but the kids saw something else. They saw him enforcing Robyn's standards without considering anyone else's practical needs or emotional realities. They saw him policing their choices while giving endless grace to Robyn and her children. And when they questioned anything, he treated them like they were reckless or inconsiderate. That didn't feel like a dad trying to keep everyone safe. It felt like a dad trying to keep one household comfortable. There's a scene on the show where Kody tells the older kids they need to follow the protocols if they want to see him. The kids push back, not aggressively, just realistically. They have school, jobs, lives. And instead of understanding that, Kody treats it as defiance. He says they're making choices that show they don't value him. That one statement sticks with them because it flips the entire situation. The kids weren't refusing to see their dad. They were refusing to adopt rules they hadn't helped create and didn't understand. But Kody interpreted their hesitation as rejection, and they realized he wasn't hearing them at all. He was only hearing Robyn's fear. This is where Tony steps in with the kind of blunt clarity he's known for. He says it's obvious to him that the rules came from Robyn, not from the medical guidance Kody claimed to be following. He points out that the intensity of the rules matched her personality, not the father the kids grew up with. And the second he says it, Mykelti nods like she's relieved someone finally said the quiet part out loud. The kids didn't mind being careful. What they minded was feeling controlled by a parent who wouldn't admit who he was actually trying to protect. COVID pulled families apart everywhere, but in this case, it didn't create the divide. It revealed it. It showed the kids that their dad wasn't a mediator anymore, he wasn't trying to balance multiple households, he was prioritizing one and only one. They watched him spend holidays with Robyn's kids, but demand that everyone else earn their spot at the table. They watched him criticize them for living their lives, while he lived his according to whatever made one person feel safe. And they watched him justify every distance by pointing to rules they never helped shape. For a parent-child relationship, that kind of imbalance leaves a mark. You don't forget? Because once a kid realizes they're being treated differently, no amount of apology restores the old dynamic. It's like a glass that cracks in slow motion. You can hold it together for a while, but you can't pretend the fractures aren't there. COVID didn't break the Brown family. It just made the cracks visible. And once everyone saw them, they couldn't unsee them. After the height of the pandemic, something interesting happened. The world slowly adjusted. Schools opened, workplaces adapted. Families created their own balanced routines. But in the Brown family, the tension didn't ease. In fact, it got worse. Why? Because once things calmed down, the kids started looking back at the choices their dad made. And when they did, they reached a painful conclusion. The rules weren't about keeping the whole family safe. They were about keeping one household comfortable. They noticed the selective flexibility. They noticed the exceptions. They noticed that the boundaries only shifted when Robyn felt okay, not when anyone else needed connection. And that realization changed everything. The disappointment wasn't about the rules themselves. It was about what the rules revealed. On the show, one of the kids says they felt like they were being put through a test. If they followed the rules exactly, they earned a visit. If they slipped up, even accidentally, they were punished with silence. And while the other families were told to sacrifice, Robyn's house never seemed to bend in the same way. This is where the emotional core of the story crystallizes. The kids didn't feel like equal parts of a big family anymore. They felt like outsiders who needed permission to be included. They felt like they were being measured against expectations that weren't explained to them. And they watched their dad enforce those expectations with a level of intensity they'd never seen before. Mykelti talks about this with a mix of sadness and matter, of fact acceptance. She says the kids started realizing their dad wasn't reacting to them. He was reacting to whatever he thought Robyn would worry about. And once they saw that pattern clearly, they stopped taking his anger personally. They started seeing it as something filtered through someone else's perspective. Tony takes it one step further. He says that the kids felt like they were competing with Robyn's household for emotional priority, not for time, not for affection, but for influence. That's not a normal family dynamic, and once you notice it, you can't go back to pretending it's not happening. In any family, especially a large one, kids can accept a lot of flawed behavior from a parent as long as they feel loved, valued, and understood. But what they can't accept is being treated like a threat. They can't accept being made into the problem, and they can't accept being held to standards that no one else is expected to meet. This period forced the Brown kids to reevaluate their relationship with their dad. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. They needed to protect their own emotional stability. They needed to stop waiting for a version of him who wasn't coming back. And here's the part most viewers don't realize. When children finally stop making excuses for a parent, it usually means they've been doing it for far longer than anyone knew. COVID didn't push the kids away. It forced them to step back and see the truth with clarity. That's why, when their dad later tried to mend fences, so many of them hesitated. They didn't want to reopen a wound only to watch him retreat back into the same cycle. They didn't want apologies that would evaporate the second. They didn't align with Robyn's feelings. The damage wasn't done in a single argument. It accumulated. It hardened. It became a reality they had to accept. After years of trying to make sense of their dad's behavior, Mykelti and Tony reached a breaking point. They realized that staying silent wasn't helping anyone, least of all themselves. And what they decided to do was simple in concept but powerful in practice: speak the truth about Robyn's influence. They called it out directly. They didn't soften the edges. They didn't hedge their statements. They said that Robyn has consistently been a filter between them and Kody. That their father doesn't react to them naturally anymore. He reacts to what she projects, what she fears, and what she wants. And in doing so, he's become a man they no longer recognize. In one of their candid moments, Mykelti says that while watching Special Forces, she noticed a version of her dad she hadn't seen in years. She says, This is the dad I know. This is the one who owns his mistakes, who listens without judgment, who doesn't measure every action through someone else's discomfort. Then she contrasts that with the version on Sister Wives, saying it's like he's been rewired to prioritize Robyn's perspective over everyone else's. Tony adds, "It's not that he doesn't care about us, it's that she decides how much he can care." This is the heart of the call-out. It's not a dramatic attack. It's a description of cause and effect. The kids are saying, "We've lost the dad we knew because another adult became the primary lens through which he evaluates all relationships. And that adult, whether intentionally or not, has set up barriers that prevent reconciliation." To an outsider, it might look like simple in-law conflict, but for them, it's far deeper. It's about identity. It's about consistency. It's about whether Kody can ever act as a father without someone else's influence, dictating the terms. There's a common misconception that large polygamous families only break apart because of personality conflicts or jealousy. That's part of it, yes, but the emotional mechanics here are much more precise. The kids aren't upset because Robyn exists. They're upset because the person they trusted, their dad, has made someone else the arbiter of their relationship. And when that pattern sets, it is virtually impossible to restore trust. Think of it this way: if a parent can only interact with you through a filter, you never know whether the connection you are getting is real. And if that filter always favors someone else's comfort over yours, you begin to question everything they say, everything they do. Mykelti and Tony had to speak out. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. They wanted to make the dynamics visible. Not to hurt their dad, but to protect themselves, to acknowledge the truth of what was happening to them. One of the most important things Mykelti and Tony emphasize is that a single apology can't erase years of broken patterns. They highlight Maddie's perspective, which perfectly illustrates this. Maddie has said multiple times that an apology doesn't automatically restore a relationship. It's not enough to say "I'm sorry" and expect the damage to disappear. The kids need action, consistency, and accountability. This is a subtle but critical point. Kody may think he's taking steps by apologizing on camera, but the kids aren't judging him by words. They're judging him by patterns. They're looking for repeatable behavior that demonstrates genuine change. Maddie, in a recent podcast, explained that she would accept an apology from her dad, but that doesn't mean she would immediately re-establish a relationship. She said the only way he could earn her trust is through sustained effort, showing up consistently, being present, and following through on commitments. That distinction is key. It's not rejection, it's a measured response to long-term behavior. The kids aren't saying their dad doesn't matter, they're saying that years of neglect, absence, and manipulation, some directly tied to Robyn's influence, can't be erased with a single heartfelt statement. Tony echoes this sentiment. He points out that Kody has 18 children. He was often physically absent during crucial stages of their upbringing. He traveled for work, left responsibilities to partners, and allowed Robyn to dominate the narrative in ways that distanced him from his kids. Consistency wasn't just missing. It was impossible under the circumstances Kody created. This is where people often misunderstand the children. They aren't holding grudges forever. They're being realistic. Rebuilding trust is a process, not an event. Apologies are symbolic, but consistency proves authenticity. For a father who has repeatedly prioritized one partner's comfort over the children's needs, actions speak louder than words, and the kids have been watching closely for years. So when viewers see Kody attempt reconciliation, the children's measured response isn't cruelty. It's wisdom. They've learned that a single attempt doesn't undo a decade of patterning. They need proof that the behavior is changing, and that proof has to exist independently of Robyn's approval or interference. Even when Kody shows signs of wanting to rebuild relationships, Robyn's influence remains a major roadblock. According to Mykelti and Tony, it's not just about the past, it's about the present. Robyn sets the conditions for reconciliation, and often those conditions are impossible for the older kids to meet. For example, she has positioned the relationships as a package deal. If the kids want a relationship with Kody, they must also accept her. This tactic, intentional or not, effectively forces them into a corner. And because many of the kids don't trust Robyn or feel wronged by her behavior, the conditions themselves become insurmountable obstacles. Tony explained in one video that his dad can't separate his feelings for Robyn from his feelings for the children. He describes situations where Kody tried to reconcile but immediately framed interactions through Robyn's perspective. He would ask himself, how would she feel? Would she be comfortable with this? Instead of asking, what do my kids need from me? That mindset is critical. Kody isn't just failing to rebuild trust, he's actively letting Robyn determine whether reconciliation is possible. He has ceded emotional authority to someone who doesn't prioritize the children in the same way he once did. This dynamic creates a pattern where the older kids can't feel safe opening up, because any gesture they make is evaluated not just by their dad, but through a lens that may oppose them. This is what Mykelti and Tony mean when they say their dad's behavior is reactive rather than proactive. He reacts to Robyn, to her comfort level, to her perception of the kids, rather than stepping into his own role as father. And that reaction is why repeated apologies and reconciliations have failed. At its core, this situation highlights a larger problem in blended or polygamous families, when a parent allows one relationship to dominate the emotional decision, making everyone else suffers. The kid's experience isn't about entitlement or being difficult. It's about trying to navigate a relationship where trust and consistency are filtered through someone else's approval. Robyn's influence isn't inherently malicious, but combined with Kody's tendency to comply rather than lead, it becomes a barrier. It ensures that every attempt at reconciliation feels conditional, leaving the kids wary and hesitant. The emotional toll isn't minor. It shapes how they perceive their father and how they interact with him today. The influence Robyn has over Kody doesn't just create short-term tension, it has lasting effects on his relationship with each of his children. According to Mykelti and Tony, the older kids have learned to navigate their father carefully, always considering how Robyn will react. That constant second-guessing changes the nature of the bond completely. They explain that this dynamic has caused some children to withdraw emotionally. They stop sharing their lives fully because they know that their dad's reactions are filtered through someone else's lens. They feel like their own experiences, opinions, and feelings must pass through a filter that prioritizes Robyn's comfort. It's exhausting and alienating, and over time it erodes the natural connection they once had. Mykelti points out that when Kody attempts to reconnect, he often does so selectively, favoring interactions that won't trigger conflict with Robyn. Tony adds that this selective engagement means some children see him more rarely, creating unequal relationships that feel transactional rather than familial. They both stress that these patterns make genuine bonding extremely difficult. The reality here is painful but straightforward. A parent who lets a partner dictate the terms of every child interaction risks losing the children entirely. Apologies and good intentions can't overcome structural patterns of influence. The children are responding not to malice but to a consistent, observable pattern. Kody's care for them is always mediated through Robyn. And this is why Mykelti and Tony emphasize that their critiques are not about judging Robyn alone, they are about highlighting the combination of Kody's choices and Robyn's influence. Both contribute to the fractured relationships, and until the pattern is addressed, reconciliation will remain incomplete. This story is ultimately about accountability. Kody can apologize, cry on camera, or even express regret. But if he allows Robyn's perspective to dominate the decisions that affect his children, the dynamic remains unchanged. The consequences are real: fractured relationships, lost trust, and children learning to protect themselves emotionally. For viewers, it's a reminder that reconciliation is not just about words, it's about consistent independent action. And in this case, it's about a father learning to step back from external influence, to rebuild a relationship with his children on his own terms. Even with all the tension, Mykelti and Tony have seen moments when Kody genuinely tries to reconnect with his children. There are times when he reaches out, tries to spend time, or expresses interest in rebuilding trust. But almost every attempt runs into the same barrier: Robyn's influence. The kids describe situations where Kody shows up wanting to apologize or engage, but every interaction is pre-filtered through what Robyn would approve or disapprove of. They say he hesitates to push forward if he thinks she will be upset or uncomfortable, and sometimes he outright abandons the attempt because he doesn't want to upset her. Tony explains that even when Kody wants to take responsibility, Robyn sets the parameters for the interaction. She places implicit or explicit conditions. You can talk to the kids, but don't say this. or make sure they also respect me, or only do this if it doesn't cause friction. The children interpret these conditions as a signal that the reconciliation isn't truly for them, it's for someone else. This pattern is key to understanding why apologies alone are insufficient. The children aren't rejecting their father's effort. They're rejecting the filter that always comes with it. If Kody cannot separate his decisions and actions from Robyn's approval, the kids can never feel the interaction is fully genuine. It's also why they emphasize the importance of independent accountability. They need Kody to act as a father first and as a husband second. Until he can do that, every apology or attempt at connection risks being interpreted as performative or incomplete. This is where the cycle becomes painfully clear. Attempts at reconciliation fail, not because of lack of love, but because patterns of influence remain unbroken. Robyn's presence, combined with Kody's willingness to let her steer the narrative, means the children never see the unfiltered version of their father. Mykelti and Tony's message is not about alienating Robyn. It's about showing that when influence overtakes responsibility, relationships with children can be damaged in ways words alone cannot fix. Rebuilding trust requires removing the barriers, not just issuing statements of regret. After all the conversations, interviews, and reflections, Mykelti and Tony leave viewers with one clear message. This isn't a story about one bad parent or one controlling spouse. It's a story about patterns, influence, and the long-term effects those dynamics have on children. The children have seen a father who loves them in pieces, filtered through the lens of someone else's approval. They have watched attempts at reconciliation rise and fall depending on Robyn's comfort. They have learned that a single apology isn't enough, and that actions, consistent, independent actions, speak louder than words. Mykelti sums it up by saying that the dad she sees on Special Forces is the dad she knows she can trust. Tony adds that when Kody acts independently, without filtering everything through Robyn, the interactions feel authentic and the children can feel safe engaging. But until those patterns change, the family remains fractured. This story isn't just entertainment, it's an insight into how influence and conditional love can reshape relationships. For the Browns, Robyn's role has been pivotal, not because she is inherently malicious, but because her influence over Kody determines whether the children feel heard, valued, and safe. For viewers, it's a reminder that reconciliation is never just words. Apologies must be backed by accountability. Promises must be backed by follow-through. And parental love must exist independently of someone else's approval if trust is to be rebuilt. Ultimately, the children are asking for something simple but profound, the chance to reconnect with their father without conditions. They want a dad who can make decisions based on his love for them, not someone else's influence. They want to be seen, heard, and valued for who they are, not filtered through the lens of another adult. The lesson is clear: influence, control, and conditional love can fracture even the closest bonds. But clarity, accountability, and genuine effort, free from filters, can slowly rebuild them. Mykelti and Tony's call out isn't about blame. It is about exposing the barriers that prevent healing and showing the emotional reality that has existed behind cameras for years. As viewers, we're reminded that reconciliation is a process, not a statement, and that only love sans conditions, consistency sans caveats, and presence sans filters restore trust.